Hey, welcome back. So in my last video, gave an overview of the Leica M6, which is one of my favorite cameras of all time. I'll never get rid of it. And you can watch that if you click this link here. A couple months ago, I went through a lot of internal turmoil about what I wanted to do in terms of my images and how I create them, I guess is more important. If you've been following me and following this channel, you know that I've tried to get away from just this any camera I can get my hands on type of review and really focus on the things that are important to me and the things that I actually use, so that if you are watching and if you do care about what I have to say, the words that come out of my mouth have some sort of weight to them and importance. And so what I did was I came up with this giant pros and cons list of basically every camera that I've ever owned, what I liked about them and what I didn't like. And what it boiled down to was that I really liked the M6. It was a great camera to use, but the one thing that it was missing that I tried to find in a whole bunch of other different cameras, like the Contax G series, the Pentax 67 II, the Nikon F3, tons of other cameras, was auto exposure. Some of you might find that a little bit sacrilegious, but for me it's just something that I don't want to worry about when I'm out taking photos. I want to know that I can point and get the photo that I am expecting. And so with that, I came up with the Leica M7. I know, not that much different from the Leica M6, but here we are. So in this video, I kind of want to go over some of the changes and some of the brief differences, I guess, really, and talk about the Leica M7 itself. So Leica M7 came out in the early 2000s. It's quite a bit different than any other Leica film camera for another number of reasons, but the biggest one is that it has an electronic stepless shutter. And so that means a couple of things. Number one is that to get the full function of this camera, you do need to have batteries in it. That's different from even the Leica M6, which, while the light meter requires batteries, the entire shutter system is mechanical, so if your batteries die, you can still get the full set of shutter speeds. With the Leica M7, if you want every single shutter speed that the camera offers, you do need to have batteries in it. Now, thankfully, Leica did anticipate batteries dying in the field, and so they gave you two different shutter speed options that are mechanical. So 1/125th of a second and 1/60th of a second can operate without batteries, but that's it. That's all you got. And they designated that. If you look at the shutter speed selector here, come on camera, not the best autofocus system here. You can see the markings on the 60 and 120 have this white bar that designates that they're mechanical. Something else you'll notice when you're looking at this is that it has this on-off switch right there next to the shutter release. This is what they put on all of their digital cameras these days as well for the same function. But because it does have that electronic shutter, in order to save battery and to lock the shutter out, you do have another switch. And so, let's see. So if the red dot is visible, and we can kind of see it there, nothing's going to happen when you push the shutter. But as soon as you turn that on, the shutter will fire as it should. This has the larger version of the shutter speed dial from the M6 TTL and all of the digital M cameras as well as that auto feature that I was talking about. If you look at the hot shoe here, you'll see that it has the additional contacts, same as the M6 TTL as well, and that allows you to get the TTL function from the flash. Overall, though, this is tried and true a Leica camera. The small differences that you'll see in it, such as the larger top plate, really don't matter and really don't play into the ergonomics of the camera. This case that I had on it at the start of the video here, I believe is from a Leica M4 or the mid to late 70s, but you can see that it fits just fine on the camera, and it still allows access to your ISO selector on the back. Now, unlike any other Leica camera before it, the ISO selector does quite a bit more here. So you have your standard settings, which are just set your ISO, what camera or what speed film do you have in the camera. If you're pushing, say, Tri-X, for example, you set it at 1600. Well, that's what you would have done with any other camera. But the M7 can do a few other things. So you're able to use the ISO dial as an exposure compensation. So if you're shooting Tri-X, you know, it's 400 speed film, and you want to remember that you're using a 400 speed film, but you still want to shoot at 1600, you can always go +2 on the exposure compensation dial. That will just allow you to remember what's actually inside the camera. You're not shooting maybe 3200 or 1600 is a bad example, but you're not shooting, say, Ilford 3200, and you want to just remember what you've actually got in there. This also has DX coding, so it can automatically tell you what's inside the camera, which is what I typically use. If the camera has it as a function, I'm normally going to take advantage of it, and that's where the plus or minus 2 exposure compensation really comes into play. Now, if you're looking to buy one of these, early versions of the Leica M7 did have a slightly different DX coding system inside them, and what that means is that some people have noticed that when you go to take the rewound film canister out of the camera, it can get a little hung up in there, and so you kind of have to give it a little tap to get it to drop out. Really not a huge deal, but because of the intricacies of the rangefinder system that exists within this camera for focusing, some people do get a little bit nervous about knocking something out of whack, which I can completely understand. You buy a nice camera and you want it to work right. Leica did go back to the brass top plate for this camera, which means you'll get that nice patina, though with the way that the black chrome and the silver are applied on their more modern cameras, it doesn't wear the same as old Leica cameras. So even though it's brass, don't expect to get that really nice, war photographer style look. Not that it really matters anyway, because you're using the camera to use it, not to get the patina out of it. A few small other changes on here. Number one, this is really small, is that they went to a different font and different film counter dial in the top here. They removed the red dot on the lens release button, which is right here. When you look at the M6, let's take this guy off. When you look at the M6 right here, you may be able to see that there's a little indentation. That's supposed to be red, but it wears off really fast. This camera was back at Leica about a year ago, and they repainted that red dot for me, and it was gone within a few weeks of using it. Back to the M7 though. Once again, it takes all standard Leica accessories, so any sort of grips. They did make a few M7 specific accessories, and actually still do, because the M7 is one of the few cameras that Leica still makes in their traditional M series today. There are two other film cameras that you can buy, the MP and the MA, but the M7 is now 16 years old. It can drive a car, I guess, but you can still pick one up brand new. I don't know why you would, to be honest, unless you are a stickler for never owning a used product in your life. The M7 bought new will be around $5,000 for the body only, which is ridiculous. If you go onto the used market, you can actually get them for about the same price as an M6 if you really shop around. I've seen them for around $1,600, which will, in M6 terms, get you a really nice TTL, or the later version of the M6. You can pay up to $2,000 or so, depending on what's been done to it. It does have, I mentioned in my M6 video about the rangefinder flare-ups. Early versions of the M7 have that same problem. It wasn't until a few years down the production line that they changed it over to the MP style finder, which means you can use the rangefinder in just about any light without problems. So that is something to keep an eye out for if you are interested. Outside of that though, there really isn't a whole lot that's changed with the camera. I want to do a video that'll go a little bit more in depth in the comparisons between the M6 and M7, and I'll get to that in maybe a couple weeks or so. But outside of that, if you really are conflicted or looking between the two cameras, my recommendation personally would be the M7. Had I done it all again, I probably would have bought this camera from the outset, knowing what I know now, simply because the auto exposure works better into my workflow. If that's not something that's important to you, save yourself a couple $100 and go with the M6 if you really want that light meter. If you don't even care about that, then obviously there's a whole other litany of options that you can choose from. But that's the M7 in a nutshell for those who are curious. If you have any other questions or want to know more specifics about this camera, because it's really not talked about in the grand scheme of M-mount bodies, you really see much more focus on the M2s, 3s, and 6s. Please feel free to leave a comment below, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. But please be sure to subscribe to my channel. Check me out on social media. I'll include all the links below, and thanks for watching.